over here, seats over there. I just want to welcome you all on behalf of the staff and the Cornwall Library Board and say how delighted we are that you're with us to celebrate. It's hard to believe, but it's the 10th anniversary of Books and Blooms. And our first speaker ever is in the audience, Paige Dickey. So it's a nice... And it certainly has taken this village of Cornwall, and around Cornwall to organize this two-day event. It's a big undertaking for our library. And first of all, I want to thank our speaker tonight, Dee, and our 4 Cornwallians who are opening their gardens tomorrow. We're extremely grateful to you. And the garden tour begins at 10 o'clock tomorrow, and we hope all of you will be there. I also want to thank all wonderful volunteers. We couldn't do this without them. They help on every aspect. I want to thank our staff. We have a small, valiant, and very hard-working staff. And I also want to thank my fellow members of the Books and Blooms Committee, and we've all been working hard, led by Blake Hubbard, who has been our indomitable leader. And I do want to take just a quick opportunity to thank our sponsors. Your generosity is crucial to making Cornwall Library the vibrant place that we hope it is, we think it is. Last year we did over 150 events, which seems amazing. It ranges from children's programs to art exhibitions, classes, workshops on composting, bridge classes, art classes, all kinds of things. And probably what we're best known for, provocative, interesting discussions, talks by cutting-edge authors, art curators, and scholars. We've had so many people. We feel we're very live and vibrant in the community. But one thing you should know, our budget is considerably smaller than our neighboring libraries in Kent, Salisbury, Norfolk, and Sharon. So we need you, we need your help, and we're thrilled that you are with us today. Oh, and one other thing I forgot to mention, that in our list of things we do, I had to make notes. We even had a Jane Austen Film Festival last year. Anyway, we pride ourselves on being remarkably active, and we couldn't do it without your support. Our speaker tonight is Dee Salomon, with a distinguished career in marketing and publishing. She and her husband moved from New York to Litchfield County over a decade ago, and clearing invasive plant species from the woodland adjacent to her property led to a knowledge and a passion for native shrubs and herbaceous plants. Dee has become a vocal and very influential advocate for native habitat restoration. She writes on the topic, she advises, and her monthly Ungardener column in the Lakeville Journal is both informative and entertaining. Before I hand over the mic to Dee, I just want to remind you that the party that follows is not that typical wine in a plastic glass library event. This is a proper party. It features live music from the Crown Bank Funk Trio, who I've never heard, but I'm told terrific, and I think many of you already know, as they're very local. And we have a bartender extraordinaire, Oscar Anderson, who will be bringing back again, thanks to popular demand, a good supply of his very exotic cocktail, the bee's knees. So the reception is just literally a few steps away on the patio of the library. And now, Dee, we're so
thank you especially to Jane and to Andy Kaufman as well for asking me to speak this afternoon. It's kind of daunting to talk about gardens to an audience of so many talented gardeners. I used to spend my work days in an office in Manhattan, and now I spend my days in the woods, mostly pulling things out and observing. I'm not a horticulturalist, I'm not a botanist or a landscape designer. I'm not even sure that I'm a gardener. All these nots, in part why I named myself a young gardener when I started to write. For me, writing is a way of trying to persuade people to preserve the native habitats where they live. And this question, what makes a garden a garden? Well, it seems intuitive, right? You know a garden when you see one. Or do you? Would this be a garden? The question has been on my mind since I began removing invasive species on the 14 acres of woods, marsh, and meadow where we live near the Housatonic. I've had plenty of time to ponder the issue given the time I spend in the woods almost every day. Let's begin exploring the question with a bit of history. Many of you will know these examples. Looking back gives us a way to understand the many forms and functions of what we call a garden. The Persian garden is one of the first gardens of historical record. The walls that surround it are one of the most obvious tells that we're in a garden. We assume a wall's purpose is to keep things out, notably keeping animals from plants and people from private property. The Persian garden was actually designed as a space for contemplation, and supposedly its walls were meant to separate it from the mundane world, which also looks kind of dry. Walls continue to serve a useful and decorative function today, of course. At the beloved Sissinghurst, we see internal walls that create rooms by brickwork, hedging, or other devices, allowing different experiences in the rooms as the visitor meanders through. In England, in the early 1700s, ha-has replaced some walls. This was essentially the first invisible fence. The ingenuity of a ha-ha is that while the cattle won't traverse the ditch, the level of the pasture is uninterrupted. So from a distance, it looks like nothing is there. The notion of the garden suddenly changes from the enclosed space to include the pasture beyond. It's also a bucolic statement of wealth and status, exhibiting the land holdings of its owner. The English landscape movement of the 18th century was kind of a paradox. It emphasized the inherent beauty and goodness of the natural landscape, but in reality, these gardens weren't natural at all. Designers, notably Capability Brown, spent a lot of time curating and manipulating nature so that it would look exactly right. Such an idealized version of English landscape had lakes dug out, specimen trees shipped in, and sometimes even hermitages in which lived a live hermit. Okay, jumping forward a couple of centuries, we see a similar notion of garden design in more recent naturalistic gardens typified by Pete Odolph. It is still a feat of man shaping nature to his aesthetic vision, but in a way that is more respectful of nature. For example, plant carcasses are left to overwinter, creating shelter for insects. Derek Jarman's garden in Dungeness, England, does not rely on walls, deliberately bringing in the rugged landscape into the experience. The way landscape designer Dan Pearson explains it, naturalistic landscapes are gardens that exist rather than in rooms, in spaces. When a space lacks a firm definition of borders, the garden's context comes from other sources. Pearson has said that where historically gardens were created to be inward-looking, naturalistic gardens draw the eye out. Many of us have these kinds of gardens. It's the tree line that becomes the border. In the case of our own garden, we have extended the sight lines well into the woodland. So, a garden doesn't need a hard boundary, and it doesn't even have to have plants in it. It's an effort to shape nature for a variety of purposes, to give us pleasure, facilitate contemplation, feel a variety of sensations, display status, learn from nature, and perhaps even to do good by opening up one's garden to raise money for the Cornwall Library. But where does that get us? What makes a garden a garden? I posed the question to Paige Dickey last winter, which, as you know, is tantamount to asking the garden oracle. Paige answered that all of it. Where's Paige? Oh, hi. Sorry. Paige answered that all of it, the park, the cemetery, the restored woodland, all of it is a garden. Now, granted, she didn't mention the golf course, and I thought it'd be better not to bring that up. Underlying Paige's insight on what makes a garden is the human involvement in its creation. The design of a garden, of course, is a human conception, but moreover, the activities that achieve these garden styles, whether new styles or those that reflect an older design paradigm, they too need to be considered. Mulching, fertilizing, raking, spraying, pruning, planting, they're also part of what makes a garden a garden. Most of the time this means working with nature, but sometimes we work against nature, and even in spite of nature. And often it can seem that nature spites us back, and it's almost that beetle season, so that's nature spiting us back. The notion of the human in both garden design and garden making and upkeep may seem obvious, but it is essentially what separates gardens from wildness. And it immediately leads us to ponder, how far does human interference with nature, shaping it to our will, how far is okay? For me, this is a central issue, and I have some thoughts to share that get us to an answer. But first, a story. This is the home that Rob and I built in 2017 with the architect Bastien Allard after living on the property's guest cottage for 5 years as weekenders. We fell in love with the area and wanted to live here full time. Bastien's wife, Miranda Brooks, did the landscaping using her signature boxwood clouds. You can see that there's plenty of lawn, which is our dog Scout's natural habitat for playing catch. There are trellises with wisteria, a small parterre, a shady walk in the back of the house that has flowering shrubs. Most of the plantings are not native, and they're quite beautiful. I do say so myself. The house is nestled in the woods, surrounding it on 3 sides. In 2011, when we were considering buying this 14-acre property, of course the house wasn't there yet. To us, the land mostly meant privacy, but we never looked closely at the woods. It never even crossed our minds to go in them. From where we stood, we saw green. I think this assumption that green is good is true for many urbanites who come to the country. It actually has a name. It's called plant blindness. We bought the property, renovated the guest cottage, and moved into it in January 2012. By this time, the leaves had fallen off the trees, and you could see snake-like vines, hundreds of them, large and small, on the trees lining the edges of the woods. It looked sinister, especially as we could tell that many of the trees underneath the vines were actually dead. That is sinister. To give you a sense of how extensive the invasive infestation was, the tree in the center photo, a crabapple, is only a few feet away from the cottage. It was covered with bittersweet to the extent that it looked like the photo on the left. I took that photo recently from Cawkinstown Road just to give you an idea. Rob chopped the bittersweet and honeysuckle down, and underneath, like, all of a sudden there was this tree we didn't even know was there. On the right side is the tree more recently. You can see the lush growth behind it on the hillside. That winter of 2012, Rob and I learned about removing bittersweet vine off the trees. We cut the small ones with loppers, and the bigger ones Rob cut with a smaller version of the big chainsaw he now wields with ease. Really small. I brushed an herbicide called Garlon on the cut ends, a method I had researched online. Then I started to make my way into the woods on my own, because there were so many young trees that were shackled with bittersweet. I would sit on the floor of the woods and unwrap them. It might sound corny, but it was as if I could feel the trees expressing gratitude. A dozen years later, many of these trees are 20 feet tall. I became rather obsessed with helping the trees and spent a good part of our weekends in the woods trying Rob's patience with me. I learned about the invasive shrubs that were covering the understory as they were making it impossible to reach the bittersweet. Barberry, multiflora, rose, and honeysuckle were the main offenders, but there was also privet and buckthorn. I removed them with the same cut and poison method that I used on the vines that were too big to pull out of the ground. Within 2 years, native things started growing in. Tiny trees, of course, and we'll talk about that again later, but also gorgeous native plants which appeared like little gifts of encouragement from nature. Here are just a few of the beauties growing in the woods. Trillium, of course. Striped wintergreen. Broadleaf toothwort on the left and hepatica on the right. Blue cohosh, red baneberry, and we also have some Dahl's Iactea that's like 3 or 4 feet tall. They're amazing. That's sarsaparilla growing out of a birch tree. Sarsaparilla is a type of aurelia. And on the right is a starflower. In the growing months, I will find a new plant species or two once a month. And not including the trees, I've identified over 50 native species of herbaceous plants and shrubs growing on our property. Okay, so here's a slope adjacent to the driveway that was covered in burning bush. There's also a Norway maple in the background. You can see the yellow leaves, they haven't fallen yet. Burning bush is so aggressive that it crowds out the native plants and limits the ability for other plants to survive. This is the same hillside photographed last year at the same time of year. As soon as the burning bush was out, we started to see growth of new trees. Hickories, hemlock, northern cherry, several kinds of oak, sugar maples, striped maples, ironwood, birch, and white pine, as well as herbaceous plants and ferns. This is a 4-acre marsh on the property, and this is what it looked like about a month ago. I took this photo. And this is right next to what we just showed you. It's the neighboring area that I've not yet worked on. It's a sea of barberry and multiflora rose and bittersweet, packed tightly together for as far as you can see, which actually isn't that far at all because it's kind of like a wall. Getting rid of it, and we've only been able to tackle about 2.5 of the 4 acres, allowed the skunk cabbage to reemerge. So back to that picture. So that's kind of the after, and you know that was the before. I've read that skunk cabbage rhizomes can live underground for centuries and even thousands of years under the right circumstances. So it was there all along, but massive amounts of invasives kept it suppressed. This area runs along Route 7, which is a vector for all kinds of invasive plants that we continue to battle here. Stiltgrass, coltsfoot, mugwort. We have a small but pesky standard Phragmites that I'm very slowly eradicating. Forget-me-not clogs up the waterway, but the good is very good. When the skunk cabbage begins to die back, the thalictrum and ferns and gorgeous grasses take over, and towards the fall, the goldenrod blossoms. I've identified about a dozen native grasses that I've not seen anywhere else on the property, as well as plants such as the delicate bluntleaf sandwort on the left, and Russian marigold. I've also planted a few things to see if they can work. Tiarella in the shady parts, boneset in the sparsely populated area, and some bulrush and cattail where the Phragmites likes to grow. They're there, but growing on their own time. So I was doing the work, and I did have help. I didn't do it all on my own. And seeing the benefits of tree growth and these lovely plants growing in where the natives had taken their place. But even a few years in, there was still a lot of bare spaces, places where the invasive had been removed, and I was planting. I was planting non-natives. Yes, I was. A path lined with leatherleaf viburnum, a border with Japanese anemone, and this is mortifying to admit, vinca on the hillside to hold it together. In my mind, I'd rescued the trees, and now it was up to me to make it pretty. Same with the landscaping around the new house. I would have asked Miranda if she could potentially increase the amounts and kinds of native species to be planted, but I didn't know, and I didn't have the proper guidance to advise me. There are plenty of reasons to get rid of invasive plants, but now I know. And if you're like I was, soon you will know that there are many more reasons to replace them with native plants. A lot of people don't want to go into the wood for fear of ticks. And some of you who might take precautions against ticks find that you can't even get into the woods, given all the thorny multiflora rose and barberry. Barberry, as its name suggests, is the plant equivalent of barbed wire. It makes a fortress home for white-footed mice, which are the main vector for ticks. When predators can't kill the mice, they proliferate, and so too do the ticks. Scientific studies have shown a 60% reduction in tick populations when barberry is removed. Mostly as predators are able to reach and kill mice, but also as the barberry creates a humid microclimate that ticks really like. Take out barberry and you take out the ticks. It's actually astounding that there are no invasive plant disclosures to protect property buyers in the US. In the UK, sellers can't even list a house for sale without first removing Japanese knotweed. Awareness of rural property health by urbanites is low. Again, that plant blindness thing. But it's growing as the issue gets more attention. And while a walkable woodland is a feature that real estate agents will happily factor into a higher selling price, an infested and damaged woodland will not be disclosed, even though it can cost new owners thousands, tens, hundreds of thousands of dollars to have it remediated. Okay, aesthetics. I don't need to say much about this. Hopefully my photos will convince you that a woodland can be as gorgeous as a border of cultivated plants. And I probably don't need to relate to this group the psychological benefits from being in the woods, but it goes beyond sensorial delights and being at one with nature. Thank you, Dan. Research suggests that our biochemistry actually changes when we spend time in the natural world. Trees can help boost the immune system as they emit chemical compounds which scientific research demonstrates can activate small armies of natural killer cells. These are cells that our bodies need to actively fight disease, such as cancer. That's right, chemicals emitted by trees can help support our body's health. I hesitated till the last minute to add a bit about my experience restoring woods because I don't want to sound too kooky. But a couple of sentences. The thing that keeps me going, because it can be difficult work, is the relationship I have with the trees, the plants, and the land. It's unlike anything I've ever felt, sort of like a deep friendship. And I feel privileged to experience such a profound connection to nature and the earth. The sensations, smell, touch, sight, are transcendent. I have been given a new understanding of life and mortality in an almost subconscious way. But let's spend time on this last bit because it's really critical information and it will also be useful for where we left off when we asked how much interference with nature is too much. Although there are now plenty of advocates in the area of native habitat preservation, I have two people to thank for the information that profoundly shifted my mindset. Cornwall's own Heidi Kunnick, who is a PhD in environmental science, and Doug Tallamy, professor and author of several books on the topic, and co-founder, along with Michelle Alfandari, who's here, of Homegrown National Park, on whose board I now proudly participate. They provided the missing link, really just a few key pieces of information that allowed me to understand, from a scientific perspective, what the work I was doing is really all about. I'll distill it here for you as quickly as I can. First, a refresher course on 3 concepts. And I'll just read this one. An ecosystem is a community of interacting living things, plants, animals, and microbes, and their physical environment, soil, air, and water, working together as a unit. It's a self-sustaining system where everything is connected and relies on each other. The second term is coevolution. Plants and animals have evolved in ways that are useful to each other. These are often existential relationships that have taken millennia to create, and they're really specific, like our native columbine, which relies on the long beak of the hummingbird for pollination. The red petals are no accident. It's the color that the hummingbird best sees. So, when there are not yet many suitable food sources for it in the early spring, the hummingbird can easily spot the columbine and sustain itself. Similarly, the berries on the native plants, such as the shadblow, contain the needed fats and protein that will sustain birds that overwinter here or that migrate and need a lot of energy. Substitutions are just not going to cut it for most animals and plants. I wrote an article for the Lakeville Journal last year titled "Birds in a Candy Store" that details the critical issue of bird health when the berries of honeysuckle, privet, and other invasive plants are all that's available to birds. It's like junk food, mostly sugars. Non-native berries cannot sustain birds' long migrations or the cold winters spent here. Birds need the berries of native shrubs and trees to survive, and the native trees and shrubs need the birds to poop out the seeds so the species can persist. Third term is ecosystem services. Simply put, we're talking about the benefits that each inhabitant of the ecosystem gains from it. For example, and using birds again, because we love birds, birds rely on caterpillars to feed their young. Caterpillars make up 90% of a newborn bird's diet. It's true. Birds that can't get caterpillars can't raise babies, period. Nothing can replace this. A material evolutionary change will take thousands of years to happen, and in the process, it is likely that the species reliant on this food source will die. Oak trees are what is known as a keystone species. As with the keystone in an arch, their services sustain the viability of ecosystems. Without them, they fall apart. Oaks provide massive amounts of ecosystem services. They will support between 400 and 500 species of caterpillar birds and mammals. We get our ecosystem services from plants and insects too. We breathe oxygen because of trees, we eat because of plants, even meat, chicken, and fish are the result of plants. And without insects, there will not be trees or plants. Jonas Salk expressed it well. If all the insects were to disappear from the earth, within 50 years all life on earth would end. If all human beings disappeared from earth, within 50 years all forms of life would flourish. I think that makes humans the most invasive species of all. Non-native species form monocultures that interrupt the intricate web of plants and animals. What you see here is a once native wetland that has been wiped out by Phragmites. We see Phragmites everywhere. While a handful of animals may be able to survive in it, and I really do mean 5, the large majority cannot survive, and they have either been driven out of their habitat or have perished. Monocultures are also happening in the woodland. I showed you examples of burning bush and barberry in the swamp. Garlic mustard, on the right, sends a chemical through its roots that repels neighboring plants from germinating and growing. Monocultures of non-native plants alter the chemistry of the soil, not just through allelopathy, which is the scientific name for the garlic mustard phenomenon. Non-native monocultures create homogeneous soil microbiomes that can degrade the soil and lead to its erosion. They also change the pH of the soil, which prohibits native plant trees from germinating and creates conditions for poor plant and tree health. If you have any forested areas with invasive infestations, you'll notice that there's a lack of young trees growing. And when mature trees fall, which they're doing at increasing rates as they become weakened by declining soil health and invasives growing around them, because of higher winds, stronger rains, and longer drought periods, There will not be younger trees to replace the fallen trees. Our woods are facing an existential crisis. If we don't remove the invasives, we won't get new trees to grow, which are the next generation of our woods. And like the Phragmites photo I showed a few minutes ago, we will have a sea of invasive shrub, much like the photo of the portion of the swamp I haven't gotten to yet. Trees will disappear, as will their ecosystem services. Oxygen levels will be affected, carbon will no longer be sequestered in amounts we've relied on. Insects that depend on trees will die, as will the birds and mammals that depend on the insects in the trees. Yeah, it's dire. So here we have an incomplete list of some of the most prevalent invasive plants. The first column lists some of the invasive woody plants, except for the Japanese honeysuckle, which actually should be in the second column. The second column is herbaceous invasives, and the third column lists some of the plants that are garden staples that have invasive tendencies. The Cornwall Conservation Commission has been sending out inserts in the Chronicle that cover some of these plants as well, so look out for them when they arrive. I introduced earlier in this talk that what really makes a garden is human involvement, our participation in shaping nature. And the question we left hanging was, how far does people's interference with nature, shaping it to human will, how far is okay? At what point does humans' healthy ego, the ego that enables creative interaction with nature, become a kind of hubris in which humans bend nature to their will and destroy a functioning ecosystem? We are dealing with a lot of hubris in the US these days. Hubris is often just plain power and arrogance. Like, I can chop down this forest because I own the property. In the context of gardens, the arrogance is more often an outcome of lack of education and awareness, both aesthetic and scientific. Okay, just a pretty picture. Where to even begin on the aesthetic changes we would like to see in gardens around the US? Think of suburban front lawns or HOA regulations in planned communities. The naturalistic genre of garden design that we saw earlier has been a catalyst for aesthetic change. The progression in garden design away from walled-in spaces toward the inclusion of landscape can still be further advanced to include woodland areas, and should be an opportunity to work within the beauty endowed by nature. I find it somewhat ironic that at the same time that humans have destroyed so many viable ecosystems, garden design is increasingly emulating the natural world. But why make a garden that looks natural when you can make a garden that is natural one that's in harmony with our ecosystems? And regarding science education, information about the delicate balance of ecosystems is pretty new, and it certainly has not been widely circulated to the people who really need to hear it. There are people here tonight that know most or all of what I've presented. And if you didn't understand the issue of why native plants and native ecosystems are so critical, hopefully you do now. And if you want to know more, Doug Tallamy's latest book, How Can I Help?, is a great resource. So what am I doing about it? And what can you do about it? In addition to all the restoration work, here's a rundown of some of the things that I'm doing. I'm planting around the base of trees in the yard. I allowed the vegetable garden to become overgrown with violet and strawberries, so I've dug those up and I planted them around the trees to create soft landings for caterpillars and insects. This has the additional benefit of reducing the amount of lawn. I'm removing non-native things that I myself planted. It's a financial mess, and I chalk it up to education. So while there is plenty of non-native around us, we have also removed a lot. Last week we cut down 2 double-file viburnums that were about 10 feet tall and wide. I have been pulling out the seedlings from these viburnums all over the property, and I can only imagine how many other homes will have double-file viburnums growing in their woods thanks to the berries from these 2 trees. Chopping them down was the responsible thing to do. I propagate native plants from seed and by division, and I'm happy to have had enough to supply the native plant sale that the Cornwall Garden Club sponsors. I've also planted a 200-foot border of native plants along the river, through which I've learned so much about the many beautiful native plant species we can nurture instead of, or in addition to, imported species. And yes, I go into the woods almost every day and basically leave the woods. I spoke about how I find natives popping up, but I'm also constantly finding new invasives. It's important to know the plants growing around you, and these things change all the time. Last week, Heidi Kunnick showed me the phalaris growing in the field by her house. It's an invasive form of reed canary grass, and I had seen something similar that popped up on the river, and that my plant idea, I use picture this, said was native. So I thought I was in the clear. But Heidi advised me to use a magnifying glass to look at the seeds, and sure enough, they are invasive. So now I have to work very carefully to remove that. Luckily, there's only a couple there because I caught it early, and that's the benefit of really paying attention. Some of you are already doing this work, which is brilliant. For the rest of us, what does it mean to be a gardener now that we understand the reality of how non-natives and invasives are destroying fragile ecosystems? Here are a few guidelines. Add more native plants, especially pollinators, to your garden. Doug Talamy recommends using a minimum of 70% native plants in our gardens to achieve an adequate density of caterpillars and other insects needed to support bird life. Be careful what you plant. Never plant invasive or aggressively seeding non-native plants. And if you already have them, either remove them or cut the flowers back so that they don't go to seed and spread. Use mosquito dunks rather than bug spray to kill mosquitoes. And know that permethrin, when sprayed, kills not just ticks, but most insects it contacts. And I was just before this, I was reading Doug Talamy's book, and he said that when you spray for mosquitoes, the first thing that dies is actually the insects that kill, the predator insects that kill the insects that do our plants harm. So actually, when you spray for mosquitoes, you're doing like a double whammy on just the kind of thing you don't want to do. Learn about how to restore your natural areas, woodland, meadows, and wetlands, and begin. If what makes a garden is us, all of us need to begin or to continue on our own property as well as in common spaces to sustain nature by creating the conditions for ecosystems to repair themselves. The lives of our children and our grandchildren literally depend on it. To those of you who are already doing the work to save our ecosystems, thank you. I also want to thank my husband, Rob Norman, for letting me play in the woods all day. And thanks to you all for listening. If you want to know more, please sign up for my newsletter at theyounggardener.com, and I'm happy to take questions.
Butterfly bush and vinca are on your bad boy list. The deer love the vinca, and the butterflies seem to like the butterfly bush. Can you
Yes.
comment on that?
Yes, I can. My suggestion on butterfly bush would be to cut it as soon as it stops flowering, and that way it won't spread. Butterfly bush, if you've been to the UK and just like driven in from the airport, like you see the effect of it. It's everywhere, and it's, you know, butterflies might like it, but you don't want the butterflies to lay their eggs on it, because if they do, those eggs, when they hatch, they'll die. So it's, you know, they reproduce on very specific plants, so you have to be super careful. Vinca, I don't know what to tell you, it's like the plastic of plant life. Roxana?
So when you're pulling out invasive plants, what do you do with them? You can't use them in compost. What do you do?
That's a great question. So the question was, what do you do with invasive plants once you pull them out? It depends what time of year you're pulling them out. So when I try and get my work done, I sort of sequence my work based on when things go to seed. And so, for example, garlic mustard I pull it out before it goes to seed. I can compost it. I rip it in two so that, you know, it doesn't grow anymore. I put a, you know, tarp over it. Sometimes it does grow, like when I take the tarp off, I'll see one grow, I just pull it out. When you have the seed heads, you can do a couple of things. You can cut the seed heads off. It's a lot of work, but, you know, it is doable. And then you can bag it, or, you know, if you're having a bonfire one night, you can just put them on the bonfire. So, you know, that's basically, you know, sometimes like with Vinca, what I'll do is I'll drape it over one of the rooftops that's really close to the ground and let it really dry out. That's another way to do it. Is that helpful?
Yeah, thanks.
Hi.
I feel so young because I just bought the butterfly bushes. Literally, one of them is sitting in a little pot, and I'm like, pollinators. I just wondered if you could suggest, but I'm not going to put it in the ground tomorrow. Is there another wild thing that butterflies and pollinators love? Because that's what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
So I have all these hummingbirds and bees and butterflies that I've attracted, and now I feel like I'm feeding them Cheetos.
Yeah. So butterflies reproduce on very specific plants. So it's worth a quick Google search to see. But milkweed is,
I have that.
yeah, there has to be a lot of it though, you know. You've got Jill Hardweed. Anybody else have any recommendations for butterflies?
Butterfly weed.
Butterfly weed.
Butterfly.
Yeah.
Butterfly bush.
But no, not butterfly bush. No, that's not native. That's the confusion. You know, it really is an issue that goes. Oh, Heidi.
I'm pretty sure that Connecticut Invasive Plant website has a list of what to replace, you know, for each aggressive non-native, what native to replace. So they're a really great resource.
Yeah,
That's
that's CIPWG. Yeah, .org. But you do have to do a little bit of research to see what works for you, if it's sunny or shady, or, you know, what kind of.
Should I take pictures of butterflies that are all there? I'm serious to do it by contact.
You could, absolutely. You can totally do that. You can Google lens the butterfly,
Yeah.
see what type it is, and then see what it eats.
Okay.
Very, very simple. Anybody else? Okay. One last one.
You spoke in the beginning about cutting and then poisoning. Was there a particular poison that is
Right. This
poison without being too poisonous?
No, there's no poison without being too poisonous. So the thing is to be very careful how it's used. Ideally, you want to pull things out of the ground and not use poison. But, you know, if you're dealing with, you know, things this big, it's hard to do. So in that case, you cut and you just paint it on the cut root end. And, you know, there's basically glyphosate, which is a Roundup product. There's also a Roundup Custom that you can order online, which has I won't go into the details, but it's slightly better than Roundup, slightly safer than Roundup, not for you, but for the environment. And then there's triclopyr, which is another herbicide that you can use to paint it on. I try not to spray. I can't remember the last time I did spray. So that's my advice.
Anyway, I just want to thank you for this. You've given us a lot to think about, and for that we're so grateful you spoke and opened our eyes to a lot of horrors that I think I've been very blind to. Anyway, on behalf of the library, I'd like to, it was a wonderful talk, and if everybody and you all get a chance to talk to Dee at the party, and so head on over and